All right, welcome to SBL for the 2025 March examinations. So this is our first revision session. So the purpose of this session is for students who are going to attempt the exam. We'll have a quick set of tips and instructions that might give you the added marks to pass the exam or get the prize. So let's have a quick look at the important points that might gain you more marks. As you are aware, the examination is a 3-hour paper where pre-scene is released 2 weeks before the exam. For the March exams, the pre-scene will be released on the 18th of February. And obviously, all questions are compulsory. And you can expect around 4 to 5 tasks based on the post-scene in the exhibits. And keep in mind, 20% marks are awarded for professional marks. I am obvious that all of you should be aware of the marking scheme. And as you are well aware of the purpose of SBL as well as what SBL aims to create and cultivate an ACCA professional onto, there are various major skills the examiner wants to test you. Keep in mind, each task will test one core skill. It can be on testing a student's communication ability because as leaders, communication is vital. You are aware that in organizations, in reality, one of the major concerns that had exaggerated problems, that had kept conflicts unresolved, is due to inefficiencies in communication. That's why communication is very important. The clarity of communication, the way you communicate, I am sure that you would have learned about how effective communication should be. Communication is basically where a message is passed between parties. So you have to make sure as a leader, you use proper communication in the relevant context. Communicating using a letter, an email, a report, a briefing note, and even it can be presenting through a slide. There are differences in terms of how you present the data, the tone, the language, the content. So as a leader, you need to cultivate these skills. Next is about commercial acumen. I would say this is one of the major skills that is expected from students. You should have the business acumen. In very simple terms, your response should be more or less an application to real world scenario. Rather than you memorizing theories, models, memorizing content, we want you to be able to understand the situation of the organization and respond reasonably practically. So that logical, that rational, that practical response is what is expected by the examiner. Your analysis skills. Next is about your professional skepticism. I would say this would be amongst the top 2 skills that students must cultivate throughout this module, keeping aside the examination. Professional skepticism, in simple terms, is where you should not purely trust the data presented to you. You can't always question every single data. Obviously, your subordinates, as a leader, you have subordinates. They would find the data, they would present the data. You might outsource certain services to research agencies to collect data. So these data that you receive, obviously, is what you have to rely on. But you should not blindly trust. Any areas in the data that sounds problematic should be healthily questioned. That's what professional skepticism. Because in today's world, amongst the large amounts of data, big data, there are both accurate and inaccurate data mixed up. So as a decision maker, you should have the judgmental ability to have concerns of data that sounds a bit fishy. So you can't outright reject without any evidence, but when data mismatches, you should be able to identify that, okay, there's something that does not sound right. 2 typical data that is not going along together. and you should be able to question them. The examiner would appreciate as long as you healthily question with very rational reasons. And evaluation is one more skill that can be tested. And here you can see what sort of areas the examiner will expect you to display in different tasks. When it comes to communication, so these are the key points you need to keep in mind, because see, when it comes to communication, it can be just informing. Informing is basically where you communicate, pass the message. Persuading is where you convince. So passing the message and convincing are two different requirements. Be very careful with these specific requirements. It can be clarified where you explain, trying to ensure that there is proper transparency. Keep in mind the audience. If we are addressing to the board, if we are addressing to a different stakeholder, obviously the way, the content, the depth of the communication would be different, as well as the medium of communication. Are we communicating through a report or a briefing note or a letter or an email? There are differences. Obviously, an email, we don't have massive emails. Emails go basically, the body contains a summary of what the email is all about, along with any additional attachments. But reports can be very elaborative. Commercial acumen tests your business sense, where they can ask you to demonstrate your awareness, display judgment, and even display your insight on the particular case. Analysis can be about investigating information, inquiring, considering. So these are certain sub skills that can be tested. So always make sure you properly focus on what the task is, what the task is expecting you to, because 20 marks comes from professional skills. So if you are, so obviously losing out this it does not make enough sense, right? Things that you can easily achieve to displaying your skill. So make sure you do not miss out on this. When you're being skeptic, it can be about probing, it can be questioning, and even challenging information. Keep in mind, when you are questioning, always one area that can play a key role is the raw content of ethical behavior. And finally, on evaluation, they can ask you to assess, estimate, appraise. So when you are evaluating, always keep in mind on materiality. So prioritization of information is the skill that you have to develop when you are organizing your answers. So that's a bit about the 20 marks for professional skills that you could basically obtain as long as you pay sufficient focus on. On top of that, I'll be going through a couple of tools that can help you in the examination. Now, I want to clarify, students, that models can be theories, it can be conceptual frameworks. The examiner does not want you to memorize this and insert them in the exam. Keep in mind the models, the theories, the frameworks you learn through SBL. They are tools alone. Just because you insert a model, you won't get marks. Because unlike other papers, SBL aims to ensure to what extent can the student respond in the given scenario rationally and practically. So in real world scenarios, yes, we use frameworks, but frameworks, models are tools that will help us organize our evaluation, organize our solution, or organize our answer in simple terms. These models, theories, frameworks are not mandatory. Keep in mind, unless the examiner asks, most tasks he will never state out which model to use and whether a model should be used. Keep in mind, these models, theories, frameworks are supplementary tools. What matters at the end of the day is, did you understand the requirement and were you able to give a proper solution or a proper analysis? Now, to make sure your analysis or your evaluation is objective, to make sure that your evaluation is objective, now comes the role of these globally well-known tools. For an instance, let me say that I am the director. I'm asking you, a manager, to do an analysis on, let's say, the macro environment. You had learnt of PESTEL. So PESTEL is actually not needed. What is PESTEL? Yes, you just categorize your opportunities and threats of the macro environment into these 6 categories. You can identify the same insights without PESTEL. Yes or no? Very easy. So if you had just noted down all the insights in the macro environment and brought it up, there can be voices raised questioning your objectivity. Employees in the organization who dislike you or who want to challenge your discussion, they might bring, one of the problems they might bring up is, they might ask you, have you been biased? Have you missed out certain analysis? A very reasonable question. Now, if you have not used a model, how can you justify telling that, okay, I have taken everything under consideration? Now, that's where these models, theories, and frameworks come into play. Why? These models are globally accepted. Academics, corporates, they accept, they utilize these models. So if you're able to present the same information using, let's say, a PESTEL framework or a PEST framework. Now, when anyone starts questioning whether have you missed things out, they are indirectly having doubts on the framework. Now, this becomes your largest support as a decision maker. To tell people, yes, my analysis is done and I've used this particular framework, which is well known, which is well recognized by everyone in the world. And through this, you basically generate your insights. So this is where some of the models will help you out in the exams to represent objectivity in your evaluation or solution. There are also certain models which play a different role. For example, a model like Porter's generic strategy displays successful options for competing successfully. So they display 4 different successful competitive strategies. So here certain models itself will help you, will provide you a solution. Now, for example, if it asks you to help advocate how the company should compete in the industry, rather than you providing a large explanation, you could utilize Porter's generic strategy and bring up one of their 4 competitive strategies. It can be cost leadership, differentiation, cost focus, or differentiation focus. And then using this model, you extract one of their suitable solutions and then work on that. This will save your time. Similarly, for example, BCG matrix on how to allocate resources. So these are another type of models which will help you generate the answer instantly. So if without this model, still you can generate answer, but you'll have to start justifying every single sentence you are discussing. And if you are to develop a rationally justified answer without using a model, it takes a lot of time. So why should you waste time? So keep in mind, these models are tools for you to develop your answer. It's not 100% mandatory, but this will make your life easier. So in that context, always keep in mind the models themselves will not give you marks, will not make you pass the exam. It's all about how you use these models. So these are some of my favorites when it comes to a strategy. These are some models that I personally believe have a lot of practical application. So I would start with the model brought by Johnson, Schultz, and Whittington when it comes to strategic planning. So you know what strategy is? Strategy is simply what a company believes needs to be done to achieve their objective. What a company has decided to implement to achieve their pre-planned objective. So strategies are not built up instantly. They are basically having a scientific process. First, we need to understand our current situation, strategic position or strategic analysis, where we analyze our business environment. And upon understanding our situation, we have our objective in mind. Comparing our targets with the current situation, now we will develop and derive possible strategic options that can be utilized to achieve this objective. From that, we select the most suitable strategy, and the selected suitable strategy is now implemented. And when implementing, obviously, in reality, not everything's perfect. There will be deviations. So again comes the need to understand where we are. That's why this is called basically not a process, it's called a cycle. And from here, I would prefer another model, that is when you are developing strategic choices and selecting one of those strategic options or choices. How do you identify that? Let's say you develop 10 different possible strategic options or choices, and you'll have to implement one or two of them. So how do you determine which one or two of these strategies are suitable for you? For that, we use a framework, a very simple framework. I call this the SFA framework, where you evaluate all the strategic choices using three factors. One is the suitability, the feasibility, and the acceptability. So as a decision maker, I basically have a lot of priority on these two simple models. One is the strategic planning process, as well as the second one is how to evaluate strategic choices. Evaluating every strategic option based on suitability, feasibility, and acceptability. Suitability is testing whether if I implement this strategy, will I achieve my objective? Feasible, do I have the resources to implement this? Acceptable, is this strategy in line with the company's values, vision, mission, direction? Will this be accepted by the board and stakeholders? A very simple model, but has a lot of involvement in decisions, because at the end of the day, every decision a company makes is a choice. Every single decision, no matter what circumstance, they are part of the strategy. Decisions are not taken blindly, it's taken to achieve an objective. So evaluating these strategic choices is a no. So for examination purpose, I would love you to have a very sound understanding of these models on understanding the strategic position when it comes to environmental analysis, internal and external analysis. And then there are some commonly known, well-known strategies. It can include both Porter's generic strategy, a model used to identify successful competitive strategies. Bowman's strategy clock, which is an alternative to Porter's generic strategy. Porter's value chain, which is used to identify how to create value. So these are 9 activities that will create value. And any activity that does not fall into these nine are non-value adding activities, where we can remove inefficient efforts. And also, if we understand that we do not have sufficient focus on one or more of these activities, that's where we have to put more effort on, because the higher the value, that means the higher the customer will appreciate our product. Value network, Porter's value 5 forces, which is used to understand the profit potential of the industry, to determine whether should we invest in an industry as well as should we continue the current operations in an existing industry. Porter's diamond. Ends of growth matrix, another pretty important model which shows us growth strategies. When a company wants to grow itself, these are possible avenues they could look into to grow themselves. From market penetration to product development, market development, or even completely move into different markets through diversification. Again, as I said before, this is one of the models that I personally prefer would be of utmost help to in the examination, where you have to evaluate strategic choices. This can be given in any context. For example, a director has a proposal and he thinks that his proposal is possible to be implemented, and they ask your comments, evaluate based on SFA. Is it suitable? Is it feasible? Is it acceptable? If all three are providing a go sign, then it's implementable. Because why? It achieves the objective. It is practical and acceptable in terms of values, in terms of the strategic method. It is totally acceptable by the current business and stakeholders. So there's no reason for us to reject it. So similar to this, we in the syllabus, we in the curriculum look at many spaces. So I would basically focus more on areas like ethics, corporate governance, as well as the involvement of IT, like big data, like the role of cloud computing, usage of IT facilities in the organization context, because these are areas that can mean a lot in today's business world, and the same is for the examination. Now, keeping this aside, I would next speak about how I would recommend you plan for your exams. Obviously, many of you would have a very sound understanding of what you had learned in the curriculum. Now, once your pre-scene is released, for example, let's say this was the pre-scene for the December 2025 examination. Once you receive your pre-scene, it's an approximately 10-page audit. I want you to properly read through this, and it's safe if you have your own note. Why should you have a note? Some would ask, okay, sir, why not I mark, write, highlight on the case itself? That's possible. There is no wrong way here. There's no, as people say, there is no one best strategy. But as the tutor, I would recommend you go through, you can highlight, you can scribble. And I want you to be able to create a proper mind map related to the pre-scene. Now, when it comes to pre-scene, another misconception students have is they always say, okay, some of them say, sir, is pre-scene important? Because once you go to the exam, you get the post-scene, the exam exhibits, and the task. And the tasks are directly related to the exhibits. So they are like, sir, is pre-scene really important? It is important. Yes, you have the tasks are related to the exhibits, and the exhibit will provide direct content that will help you do the task. But the context, the circumstance of the organization is not known in the exhibits. The circumstance of the organization is known in the pre-scene. Two different companies both have the same problem. For example, both are losing customers in the same industry. But one is a new company, the other one is a century-old company. Do you think the solution should be the same? Not really. One is a market leader, other one is having very less amount of customers, a new company. Obviously, the way they respond should be different. Now, understanding that circumstance of the company, the industry, the competition, the financials, that's in the pre-scene. So even though for the tasks in the examination, you look at the exhibit to find direct information, you always should keep in mind the context, the circumstance the organization is in, because you are now a decision maker, a senior personnel. You will be in the position of a consultant, an advisor, or even maybe a director. So at that time, you cannot make narrow-minded decisions. You need to understand the overall context and then take proper decisions. For that, having a proper understanding of the pre-scene, understanding of the company, the industry, the market, the competition, and the financials is pretty important. For this, I would love to do a SWOT. So I would recommend you read the pre-scene and then note down in a word pad the main information you feel is important. It can be good stuff and it can be bad stuff. So what I do is I do something like this. I read and orderly I note down about the information of the organization, the industry, the product itself, the client revenue, about the clients, the risks, technological innovations, KPIs. So I have not added any of my personal notes here because this is directly understood from the pre-scene, and I have written it in a very concise way where I will be able to recall. So I note down this completely. Why do I do this? Because once I myself had written this note in the WordPad, when I go through this WordPad again, I'll be able to quickly build up the mind map because this is what I wrote. When I read what I wrote, I will be able to recall quickly what was that all about. You read this once, you read this twice, you read this thrice. Now you know the important stuff because you yourself filtered out the important stuff. Based on this, I would recommend you to develop a nice SWOT. So this is a SWOT which I basically developed for the pre-scene. Again, no subjective factors, no new factors that was brought in. I read from the pre-scene, from your notes, identify what are the internal environmental factors, the external environmental factors. From the internal environmental factors, identify the strengths and weaknesses. And from the external environmental factors, get the opportunities and threats. And now, after I had created a mind map through reading my notes, now I develop a SWOT. But based on that, now I can have a clear understanding of what the company's strengths are, what the company is doing better than competitors. So using strengths, you should be able to exploit opportunities. You should be able to grab opportunities. You could use this to negate threats. Weaknesses, areas that can create risks for the company, areas that needs to be improved. Opportunities, things that can greatly benefit the organization if exploited, and threats, things that pose a risk to the organization. So these are the major findings, takeaways I take from the pre-scene. So I would always recommend my students, please try out this, because if you go to the exam properly having a clear mind map as well as identifying the major factors that are unique to the company, these could be factors that you can also add to the final answer. So this is a practice I basically recommend my students. And through this, you can also identify possible concerns, because the examiner specifically stated, do not try to forecast the questions. Forecasting questions is good, but the problem is if you try to forecast the tasks and in case you get different tasks, I don't want you to be unsettled in the examination. Okay? Forecasting is fine, but the problem is in the examination, in the professional levels, you forecast, you trust your forecast, but you go there, you see a different task that can create an unsettlement. However, you can have an idea of possible critical areas, concerns based on your SWOT. The next thing, the final thing I want to communicate with you is the examiner has specifically stated students do not bring information that is not provided in the case. If you had observed in all past papers on SBL, the industries that are taken are quite unusual niche industries. I remember there were many past papers where the industries included a football club. We love football, professional football, but only a few of you would have worked for such an industry. There was an industry where the industry was on a vet business, vet industry, veterinarian industry. Again, how many of you had worked there? Very limited. Airlines, budget airlines, very limited exposure. They won't go into FMCG. I don't think they would do anytime soon. That's why the examiner knows, yes, those who would have personal work experience in such industries will have an advantage. But the examiner ensures that those students who have no experience in the industry provided will not have a disadvantage, because whatever you want to know is given in the pre-scene. If you are new to the industry, don't worry. What you know, what you want to know about the industry is given in the pre-scene. And the examiner has strictly stated you should only take information provided in the pre-scene. And on a very personal note, students who have personal experience, please do not bring information that is not presented in the exam to your answer script. You lose marks. Okay, because you are bringing out information not given in the case, meaning you are bringing artificial information. Even though in reality it might be right, for this particular case, you are bringing information that is not provided. So it might not be factual as per the examiner. So do not bring outside information, but you can use your personal experience to evaluate the content provided. You can use your personal experience to analyze the case, the information given in the exam better. That's the only advantage students who have personal experience have. And for others who have no personal experience, not a big deal. The examiner has used such a strategy so that everyone is treated as fairly as possible. Right. So with this in mind, I would love to wish you all the best for the upcoming SBL examinations. Once the pre-scene is released on the 18th of February, let's have a quick evaluation on the pre-scene. Right. Have a nice day.